This is Kurt from Madison ModPo, and to my left is Lou, to my right is Jim, and we are going to talk about Jena Osman's A Real-Life Drama, Found Poem. And we're going to begin with a reading of the poem, and we're all going to share in that reading. In a spirited argument, 8 of 9 justices fired questions, but the discussion ranged from goats and butterflies to koalas and even rare bugs splattered on car windshields.
Scalia, couldn't we pick an uglier example than a koala bear?
Scalia, to say this is taking an animal seems to me just weird.
Souter, it seems to me you're wrong when you say it's got to be purposeful. Justice Thomas was the only court member who refrained.
Stevens, would I be violating the law if I built a golf course without the intention of causing a bird to become extinct, but with the full knowledge that it would result in the bird becoming extinct?
Souter, fairness cannot be stretched to the point of calling this a fair trial.
Scalia, a blistering dissent.
Stevens, the right to remain anonymous may be abused when it shields fraudulent conduct, but political speech, by its nature, will sometimes have unpalatable consequences.
Stevens, anonymity is a shield from the tyranny of the majority.
Scalia, it facilitates wrong by eliminating accountability, which is ordinarily the very purpose of anonymity.
Rehnquist, this they cannot do without seriously undercutting the orderly process of law.
A spirited argument.
Stevens, the law was nothing more than an attempt to blindfold the public.
Scalia, the doctrine is a structural safeguard establishing high walls and clear distinctions, because low walls and vague distinctions will not be judicially defensible in the heat of interbranch conflict.
Scalia, in dictatorships of the modern world, bills of rights are a dime a dozen.
Imperial presidency, runaway Congress, unelected judiciary. Scalia this week borrowed from poet Robert Frost in offering one of his reasons why good fences make good neighbors. Strongly worded opinion.
Stevens, to engage in pure speculation while condemning the assertion of increased punishment as speculative seems to me not only unpersuasive, but actually perverse.
Both lawyers were peppered with questions from 8 justices. Only Justice Thomas did not ask one.
Scalia, they weren't there to recreate, they were there to express something.
O'Connor, if a circus holds a parade expressing no viewpoint except the circus is in town and everybody come, can an animal rights group demand the right to march in that parade to protest the use of circus animals?
Stevens, how to distinguish between a sign for identification and a sign for advocacy?
Kennedy, for a court to tell a private entity how to celebrate is antithetical to the First Amendment.
O'Connor, your argument is so far-fetched, it's hard to bring this down to reality, down to the real world.
Only Justice Thomas, who remained silent in most arguments, appeared troubled by the notion that the Klan's white cross is a religious symbol.
Thomas, you say this is a religious symbol? What is the religion of the Klan? If someone said the Klan was carrying a cross down Pennsylvania Avenue, would the average person, a reasonable person, think that the Klan was engaging in the free exercise of religion? or a political statement.
Impassioned dissents.
O'Connor, you come here arguing for this remarkable proposition to suppress speech in a discriminatory fashion.
What does a burning cross symbolize? Some might see fire in that cross.
O'Connor, does a reasonable person know how to read?
Justice Scalia was also scathing.
Breyer, has the paper been piling up?
Thomas, who came to the Supreme Court under a cloud and immediately withdrew into a shell of silence, peppered a lawyer with questions. So, rather than me give background about this poem or the poet at this point, I'd like to hear from you guys what your reactions were to this poem. Did it feel like did it hang together for you? And what's your take from it? And I guess, did you like it?
No.
I didn't like it, no.
That's go ahead.
On the other hand, I find the idea of finding objects for poetry and the poem becoming an object, almost like objectivism, interesting. This I didn't like.
And why didn't you like it?
Because I don't think it hangs together.
And Lou?
You gave us a reference to what poems are.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting to read. And now let's reflect whatever this is against what a poem is supposed to be. And the only thing I could deduce from all of that is that this is a presentation of something made out of words, and somebody took those words and assembled them into this form. So in that sense, I guess you have to say it's a poem. It's language that's been assembled to produce some effect. But number one, it isn't the poet's words. The poet has, except for, selecting and putting these things down, the poet doesn't enter into this at all. So does it belong to the poet? Did a poet write this? Is there a poet connected with this? I liken it to, do you want your house to be planned by an architect and built by engineers and carpenters and people who have spent their life learning to use the materials that they're building your house with to build you a sound house? Or do you want your house to be built by, let's say, a bunch of lawyers who are getting together to discuss law, but then come over to your place and start putting boards together to try and build a house? You want your car built by engineers and people who have studied mechanics and physics and things, or do you want your car to be built by carpenters? I want my poems to be built by people who can honestly claim to be poets. They don't have to be good. They don't have to be acceptable to me. Even their work doesn't have to be acceptable to me. But it has to be legitimate work by legitimate craftsmen.
We've talked about the whole notion of found poetry and whether that is something we like or not. But here's whether it is poetry. I mean, the definition that Edward Hirsch came forward with in A Poet's Glossary: poem, a made thing, a verbal construct, an event in language. The true poem has been, and these are excerpts. The poems are made of sounds and usually words. The true poem has been crafted into a living entity. There is always something mysterious, something inexplicable in a poem. It is an act and action beyond paraphrase.
You know what? The way I take that, I think fine. It's a poem. That doesn't bother me in the least. And actually, quibbling about the definition of the poem puts me to sleep. But the fact that I didn't like it is similar to the fact that the notion that I really liked Psalm.
And I want to tease that out a little bit. So
Sure, because I think that from Psalm, the notion that truth can be found in existence is not so evident to me in this particular attempt.
Yeah, so again, going to Edward Hirsch, Poet's Glossary, the found poem works by changing the concept in a piece of writing or whatever and distorting its original intent. Something mundane takes on a new layer of meaning.
What is the new layer of meaning?
Well, and that's one of my issues with the poem. What does this accomplish? And
that's it.
And I simply, we know from some of the commentary we've seen that some of the commentary she makes about this, the Supreme Court is a dramatic place. And it is the place where we get, because it's law, a focus on words. And the law is too a verbal construct. What does it mean? And this, seeing the quotations here, there's a drama to what's happening here. I went through, incidentally, and found everywhere, I'm almost done.
You find all these quotations?
Yeah, and I don't know if that really helped me. These were all cases that were released, or in terms of the actual decisions, AP wire service stories, and the oral argument transcripts, but they were all from April 1995. And where does that lead us? I mean,
Where does it lead
Well,
you?
This, to be called a poem, you have to demonstrate there's some attempt to put the words together in some kind of, I don't want to see it doesn't even have to be meaningful in a sense, but they have to be crafted. You can have a Baudrillard picture, or you can have a Rembrandt picture. One shows something we know, one shows something maybe we don't know, but they all strike us as that being done by a craftsman who knows paint, who knows color, who knows perspective, those things which you put into a picture. And so you got to put these things in a poem. So I want to read this anyway, then I'll shut up. This is from a poem which we've already covered by Milós, Czesław Milós. And this is the last two. This poet is called Ars Poetica, with a question mark. The purpose of poetry is to remind us how difficult it is to remain just one person. For our house is open. There are no keys in the doors, and invisible guests come in and out at will. What I am saying here is not, I agree, poetry, as poems should be written rarely and reluctantly and under unbearable duress, and only with the hope that good spirits and not evil ones choose us for their instrument. That's, I think, what I think of when poetry is created.
Well, just to give you a sense of the scope of these cases, one was about what is the definition of harm under the Endangered Species Act. One involved whether the application of a state law with respect to parole hearing timing was a violation of the ex post facto law under the Constitution. Does the private unattended display of a religious symbol here from the application of the KKK in a public forum violate the Establishment Clause? Corporation and bankruptcy law, evidence withheld from defendant by prosecutors, whether the state can mandate individuals disclose their names on pamphlets in a referendum, and one more, whether Congress has the power to mandate that the federal courts reopen final judgments passed before the enactment of that particular law that was at stake there. So, I mean, it was sweeping. I do think...
How are all those things evident to the reader?
I was going to say, how do those refer to what's on the page?
That's
Well,
right. The page doesn't tell you these things.
Yeah, and it was more an adventure for me, or a challenge, to find all this stuff. But I'm not sure it brings to, what it brings to bear for our understanding of her final work product. I offer it just to give you a sense, I think, or to dispute the notion that there wasn't labor that went into this. There was a substantial body of work, a substantial amount of cases that were looked at. Now, she may have just been tracking AP wire service stories, and a lot of these quotes that come from the cases actually appear in the AP wire service summaries of what happened in the U.S. Supreme Court.